welcome to day 2 of my CRaFTi Advent series. Again, I'm just doing this something different just for Advent. It's not going to be a permanent thing. But I'm going through and taking the footage from like 25 of my favourite cards that I've done over like the last couple of years and redoing them either with a voiceover or with like extra detailed annotations. So this one is, what was it called? I think it was called like the Hummingbird Dreamcatcher cards, and it's using a lot of random dies actually, because obviously in the beginning I didn't really have that many dies, like compared to the amount I have now, it's insane. But anyway, so I used to be a lot more inventive with my die and stamp sets, and this one was actually, it was a magazine freebie. I think it was on an issue of Simply Cards and Papercraft, so I'm sure a lot of you probably have it in your stash, but it is from like a couple of years ago. And this die I've just cut there is a Creative Dies one, I think. It's called like Heart Circles or something, and the flower is a Sizzix one. I think it's called like Tribe Flowers or something like that. If I can find these products still, I will put them in the description below, but some of them might be pushed to find them, but I can always link to like alternatives that look a bit like it. But anyway, so the main like inspiration for these cards was the tail from the hummingbird in this magazine freebie. It's got like flowing feathery strippy things, and it looks really cool, and I was like, well, that kind of looks like the feathers of a dreamcatcher, so I decided to stamp it a few times, and then I'd use this other apple blossom die that I'm just cutting now. Those are supposed to be leaves, I think, or extra petals to create flowers with, but I thought they looked a bit like feathers, so I'm just cutting them out of blue and white card, because back then, obviously, starting out, or well, I'd been card making for quite a long time, but I was always too mean to buy like packs of coloured card, because I'd be like, why do I need 25 A4 sheets when, you know, I'm not going to make that many cards. But so my thing to get over that was always buy a few sheets or a few packs of cards in the colours that I use the most, and then cut things out of white card and colour them. So in this video I'm cutting all the orange bits out of white card, and then I colour them with a pro marker. Anyway, you just saw me there tracing one of the dies because I wanted to get the placement right for the top of the Dreamcatcher, and then I'm adding a little bit of ink blending with some Peacock Feathers Distress ink. Top tip, press your inking tool onto the ink pad, then like swirl it onto your glass cutting mat. And then you won't get so many harsh lines when you're ink blending. I've got quite a lot of like top tip videos like that over on my third channel, CRaFTi Potential Know-How, if you're interested in that kind of stuff too. And if you're enjoying the voiceover videos in this Advent series, if you go over to that channel, they're all talking videos, so that might be more for you than this channel. So here's the hummingbird stamp. I think I stamped my sentiments out first, yes. This is the Onyx black VersaFine ink pad. And look, I used to have the tiny little baby cube because I was too mean to buy the big one. But it's funny. I re-inked that ink pad so many times, I gave it to my mum in the end and keep re-inking it for her now. So, but it's great ink though. I still do use it, but I've really got into using the Nouveau Black Shadow one now, but you're technically not supposed to use the VersaFine ink for colouring with alcohol pens, but I never had a problem with it. I found like if you just let it dry, or if you were worried, you could dry it with your heat gun as well, but if you don't go over the lines too many times, it's not going to smudge it, so I always used to use that, especially with magazine freebie stamps, because they're always that cheap polymer and they don't always stamp very well. So using that VersaFine ink pad really helps get a nice crisp impression, and especially when you don't have a stamping tool, because I didn't have one back then. Oh, I said in yesterday's video about rectangle dies, this is that dotty one I was talking about. I think it's Avery Elle, and I think maybe it's called Dotted, the die set. If I can find it, I'll link to it, but I'm not sure if they make it anymore. So there I just drew on extra bits to extend the feathers that I'd stamped, and I also drew on like what looks like kind of beads to hang off the top of the Dreamcatcher. And then now I'm picking out my colours to colour in the feathers, and you can see I've picked out some oranges because I'm going to colour the white pieces of card orange later. And for the turquoise one that's going to have the turquoise like card circle, this one, I'm trying to colour more of the feathers in orange because there's going to be larger areas of the turquoise colour, and then vice versa for the other one. I'm going to use more turquoise colours to colour in the stamped bits because there's going to be a larger area of orange card on that one. So you can see I'm just being careful when I'm colouring using that ink pad that I don't go over the lines too many times. And I'm just using a couple of colours just to get a little bit of shading, but you can't really tell on this one. I did think that Apple Blossom bought this stamp out in a separate stamp set, but I couldn't see it on the website when I looked yesterday. But they did bring out another one that had a peacock on it, so I might link to that because you could probably do the same thing with the peacock tail to get this kind of feather look, or any feather dies you have, any feather stamps you have really would work quite nicely for this. They'd obviously have to be reasonably small, but it's not that difficult to draw in sort of stringy effects to create that kind of look at the bottom of a Dreamcatcher. It's quite an easy, you know, it doesn't matter if you've got scribbly lines because that kind of adds to the effect as well. So here you can see me colouring in the white bits of card, using a couple of different colours again just to get a little bit of a shaded look, trying to use a sort of flicky motion to get that feathered look, and I'm using my pro markers as well because obviously I didn't have my Copics back then. I can't remember exactly what colours these are. I think the orange ones are called Pumpkin and Clementine or something, and that deeper blue is definitely called Marine, and the other one's probably Cyan because that used to be one of my favourites. Our top tip now, look at that. Back then I didn't know how to clean the alcohol ink off of my glass mat very easily, but now if you squirt a little bit of hand sanitizer onto a piece of kitchen roll and then wipe it over your mat, it gets it off really easily. I think I just used to scrub at it with a baby wipe before, but anyway. But I find working on a glass mat for colouring these extra little die cuts is really, really good. And those little hearts came out of that heart circle die that I've used to create the main Dreamcatcher too. And actually, I loved these cards so much that I did an art journal page inspired by it too, where I actually took the inspiration of that Sizzix flower die that I'd used in the centre and drew a bigger version on my art journal page. I'll put a link in the description actually to take you over to my arty channel where I did that page too. Oh, and here, this is one of my favourite things to do. I often forget to do it now, but I just added like a scribbly rectangle border because it goes along with the scribbly theme of the feathers coming out the bottom of the Dreamcatcher. And then I added on a few hearts. So if there's any, if you ever try this technique and you find that you've really gone off your scribbles and it's not where you wanted it to be, just add like a little doodled solid heart over it, or a flower, or whatever's going to go with your theme, and you know, it hides it. And then to cut it out, I've just left a slight white border around the edge, and then just sort of gone over and gone around where I've added in the hearts and stuff, just to cut that out. So for the bottom of the Dreamcatcher, I'm now just sort of playing around with the placement of where I want the feathers to be, maybe to hide any places where I didn't like the bits that I'd drawn in, you know, like extending the stamp line, or where I felt that it was a bit too empty or anything. I'm just sort of placing them where I think I want them to go, and then I'm going to use my fine tip glue applicator to add them on. This was actually my original glue bottle. It's still in front of me actually, but this was just normal like PVA tacky glue that I was using then, because I was like, I'm too mean to put Cosmic Shimmer glue in my little bottle because I don't want to use it all up, so I was just using PVA glue. But yeah, putting any kind of glue into a fine tip bottle really helps, because you're not going to get it squeezing out from underneath your die cut too much, because you're only adding a tiny little amount. So that's a good top tip. Save your nice glue for other things and use the cheapy tacky glue to glue down small things. So I'm just sticking all the feathers down, and you saw me just then like colour an extra one because I thought it needed something extra. And those hearts that fell out of that heart circle are really useful just to fill in the different gaps as well. And you can see I haven't done both cards exactly the same. Obviously the stamping ended up being in a slightly different place, and I've used different sizes of like the leafy feather shape as well. They're not all identical. So I'm just adding the flower to the centre of that circle. I thought that just made quite a nice Dreamcatcher look. I mean, I probably have way more dies in my stash now that would work nicely as the top of a Dreamcatcher. Actually, I want to do a winter version of a Dreamcatcher. I may end up doing it, I may run out of time, but anyway, that was another thing I wanted to do, and add in like a snowflake to the middle of the circle. I think that would look cool. So, I'm now adding some faux stitching. I really love doing the faux stitching look. And I suppose a top tip really, sometimes the stitching doesn't look that great because you start the stroke and you get like a thicker bit and then it sort of goes off thinner. So if you sort of go backwards and forwards on each stitch, so you're going back over the stitch to make it all the same thickness, that gives a nicer look as well. It does take a little bit longer, but I think just doing that helps to give a nicer overall finish, and you know, it's only a few seconds extra. And then I've just added a few sort of doodly bits to the inside of that flower as well. And now I'm finishing off the Dreamcatcher by, again, adding in some scribbly lines to attach all of the feathers and hearts to the rest of the Dreamcatcher. And you can see me here sort of drawing in curved motion lines, adding in random little kinks in the strings. This is just helping fill in the gaps in the background, because you've got quite big gaps between the stamped areas. Adding in a double loop or a single loop somewhere where there's a big area, it just fills in that empty space a bit more and gives it more of a completed look. And obviously overlapping the strings as well to come out to the further out elements too works really nicely. And again, it goes with that theme of giving that fuller look to the design as well. Adding some more faux stitching onto the design. I do like my faux stitching. I still do it now, which is quite cool. It's nice to have things that you've carried on through your crafting that you still do a lot. The pen I'm using here, actually, because I'm guessing I'll probably get questions on that. The one I'm using here is the small tip, or super fine, I think S stands for, in the Pitt pens. I don't often use my Pitt pens that much anymore because most of them have dried out now. But if you want an alternative, I like the pen, I think it's just called a fine liner. I've got one here actually. Yeah, it's just called a fine line. It's from Wilko. So they're really like reasonably priced because you get like 5 in a packet. But the only thing is, a Pitt pen is permanent. So if you were then to like watercolour over the top, it wouldn't budge. But the fine liner pens aren't permanent. So they're great for when you're going to be colouring with your alcohol pens, but not so good when you're going to use water over the top of them. But that's just something to bear in mind. Whatever you prefer doing is whatever kind of pen you would want to buy. I'm hoping you're finding these voiceovers interesting, because I feel like I'm talking a load of nonsense. But so now we're almost at the end of the cards. I'm folding my card blanks using a burnishing tool. I now use the Tonic card creaser because I can't find anywhere to link to that burnishing tool anyway. But you just want to like properly crease the fold of the card so it folds really flat and nice then. And then I'm just using double-sided tape to stick the panels to the front of the cards. I like to add it all the way around the edge and then a diagonal piece across the centre to properly hold it down. And sometimes I even add a bit of extra wet glue as well, especially this time of year when people have got their central heating on. I feel like you want to be extra secure that the corner of your card's not going to peel off because it's got warm. Well, now I'm using foam pads and cutting them into really thin strips to add around the edge of the Dreamcatcher. One, it's holding the outside circle and heart circle together because they're separate, but it's also going to give just a little bit of dimension, and you don't need to add any to the centre because it's sort of raising it up at the edges and the centre's sort of just resting there really. I think it looks nice like that. And then I think I've also added foam tape to the sentiment as well, so it'll overlap on it nicely. One thing I would say, you can see on the left hand side there, a few of the strings, you can still see them where I've drawn them underneath the Dreamcatcher. I didn't really think about that when I was drawing them in, so make sure you don't go beyond your pencil circle line that you drew before you did the ink blending earlier. That way you won't be able to see them underneath the Dreamcatcher. I don't think anybody's going to notice, but that's just something I should have thought of but didn't. So again, I'm just adding those thin strips of foam around the perimeter of the top of the Dreamcatcher. This is just Poundland 3D foam, but I've moved on to that 3M Scotch foam tape because Poundland ones have turned really rubbish now. They're like really squishy and they're not as good as they used to be. So the I really recommend the Scotch 3M foam tape actually, it's really good. Oh, final touches. So this is the Spectrum Noir Clear Overlay Sparkle Pen. I now tend to go towards the Nouveau Aqua Shimmer Glitter Gloss pen or the Midas Touch one, but this was my go-to pen back then. I still have it in my pot actually, I still haven't finished that one. But yeah, I'm just adding it all over just to add a little bit of sparkle. You could use like the Sakura Jelly Roll Stardust pens as well. Anything sparkly really. You could even use like a sparkly watercolour too. You don't have to have a sparkle pen. And then yeah, so that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed re-watching this footage if you've been around for ages and saw it the first time it came out. I just thought it'd be nice to go back through some of my favourite cards that I've done over the years. It's reminding me actually of how I used to craft and everything, and the enjoyment I used to have more from crafting. I still do, but you know. Anyway, thank you for watching, and see you in tomorrow's video, which will be one with annotations. So, bye!